Now, our final speaker today is Micheál O'Connor. Micheál is, of course, National President of the Society of Chartered Surveyors Ireland, and in his day job, so to speak, he's Senior Commercial Manager of Jacobs Engineering. He's a chartered quantity surveyor with over 20 years' experience with some of Ireland's largest and leading construction companies. He was within John Sisk and Son Limited for 11 years, gaining extensive experience, particularly in education of pharmaceutical projects. He's also Associate Director of Commercial and Chief Quantity Surveyor with McInerney's. At the time, at peak, they were Ireland's largest house builder with 1,200 residential units per annum. Micheál is a surveying graduate from LIT and also a business graduate from CIT. His wider interests also see his involvement as General Secretary of the Council of European Construction Economists. We welcome you to GMIT, Micheál. I would like to report that relations between GMIT, our department, and the Western branch of Society of Chartered Surveyors Ireland are excellent and continue to grow to the mutual benefit of both organisations. Today, Micheál is going to speak to us about the Brooker Report. Flicking through it yesterday evening when he sent it to me, a fairly brave departure whereby SCSI have decided to ask some of their principal clients what they felt about the service they were receiving. So I'll hand you over to Micheál.
Thank you, Martin. It's good to be here. Firstly, I think it's good of all the students to remain in this evening when the sun is shining. Very good of you. You know, a lot of other people will be out enjoying the fine weather. Also, just to make a brief comment, I think on the previous speaker there, Hubert, and the CIF. We're facing a very interesting time in the construction industry. There's a couple of real, I suppose, game changers underway. You heard this morning about the Construction Contracts Act. Hubert spoke about the building regulation amendments and also on the registration of builders. And there are three things really that will have a huge impact on the industry, and a huge impact on the industry that you as students will come out and face when you do graduate. And I'd like to pay a particular tribute as well to the CIF and to Hubert for setting up the Register of Builders, because the construction industry has come in for a lot of criticism in recent years, some of it unfair, but certainly there have been some instances. And certainly I think the registration of builders together with the building control regulations will go to create a better industry for everybody, and I think that's a good thing for all of us that participate in the industry and the general public as well. I take it that it's primarily students that I'm speaking to. Are there any practicing professionals here? A handful. Primarily surveyors, any engineers, practicing engineers? No? Okay. It's always good to know your audience, just in case you insult anybody. I was at a CPD in Cork a number of years back that the Society of Chartered Surveyors ran, and we had a gentleman over from the RICS, and I think he believed he was speaking primarily to surveyors, and he went on to chastise engineers. When it came to questions and answers, I became patently aware that there were engineers in the audience. So it was one of the more entertaining CPDs I attended. So just maybe for students to give a bit of background really as to what this is. This is what we call Brooker Report. Brooker were the consultants we used to undertake this report, and effectively what it is it's a study of clients in the public sector to try and get a feel, or trying to assess the level of service that they're getting from quantity surveyors primarily at the moment. And to give a bit of background to this, some of you may or may not have been aware of the GDLA form of contract, or the old engineers form of contract, the IEI form of contract. Previously, there were the two main forms of contract used for public works, and there was four of those. There was a blue and a yellow GDLA, and there was also a fixed and remeasurable engineers. There's now 11 contracts in the current suite of public contracts, which is interesting in its own right. But basically, when you had that format previously, the appointment of consultants was by and large on the basis of quality of service. You had panels of consultants that various departments picked from, and they appointed those people from. Back in about 2007, 2008, primarily under Charlie McCreevy, there was a change in terms of how public construction would be enacted. And that led to the new public forms of contract, which were fixed price contracts primarily, but also led to a change in how consultants were being appointed. And it led to consultants being appointed through fee bidding, competitions, and through fixed fees. So they were no longer just being appointed on the basis of quality, they now literally had to tender for their appointment. And that created a sea change. That as well, I suppose, was something that the Society of Chartered Surveyors Ireland advised against, something that the CIF, representing contractors, advised against, the Royal Institute of Architects of Ireland advised against it, and so did the engineers. But nevertheless, the government went ahead with it. So we've been hearing in recent times that there's been some level of dissatisfaction from public clients on the basis of the service that quantity surveyors are providing. So we undertook to go and survey that to find out what they felt about it, but also to get a feel for where the clients are coming from. And it has thrown up some interesting results. There's a lot in it. I won't necessarily delve into all of it, but I will address some of the nuggets that have come through. And I suppose it's interesting as well in the context of this that the public works contract itself is under review, so certainly we would be advocating that this also be considered. So the report, as I say, was commissioned by the SCSI, and the purpose of it was to obtain from public sector clients a rating on their level of satisfaction and feedback, comments, and on the services of chartered quantity surveying firms. And the methodology was we retained Brooker management consultants, and they did a questionnaire and telephone interview. The clients that were consulted for this, there was 30 public sector clients, 7 local authorities, 4 government departments, education, health, transport and defence, 3 academic institutions, 4 government agencies, CIE, NRA, the RPA and Irish Rail, 2 OPW, and 1 being the NDFA. And there was a good geographical cross-section of the country looked at in terms of undertaking the survey. There was 9 service areas that we asked people about, general service attributes, and they included professionalism, the QS team, resource input, and so forth. I'll go through each one of those individually soon. Cost planning, procurement advice, tender documents, construction stage and post-contract admin, final account, QS services, employers representative, construction stage ER services, and project management services. And one of the things that came back is that there was a sense that the relatively low fees the QSs are now winning work is having a detrimental effect on the quality of service. And one of the real interesting points that have come back is that a number of contracting agencies said that they would be prepared to pay double the fees if they got the service that they were used to in the past. And if that service led to a return to a more collaborative relationship between the client and the professional team. There was also some additional information obtained, being consultation, procurement, and services of SCSI members for the purpose of this presentation. I won't go through that. The result of the survey, which was heartening in one sense, in that there was a 77% rating, and most, I suppose, were reluctant to give low scores. This is an interesting thing about surveys, and if there's any of the students here that are more aspiring in years to come, they might do a bit of an exercise on this, or a bit of research on this. We find ourselves in the company that I work for, Jacobs, where we do client surveys, and we will get surveys into the 90s and so forth, and on the face of it, it looks very well. But when you start talking to clients then, the feedback you get is often quite different. And it transpires, from what I can see, that it's human nature that when you give somebody a survey matrix, they will score it higher than they feel. And then it's only when you actually get talking to them that you get the true feedback. When our consultants started talking to the clients, they got true feedback. The survey, as I say, was on a matrix basis, and also there was a qualitative response done by phone survey. This was the outcome of it. Again, the scoring was pretty high. When I looked at it first, I looked at innovation and said that scored low, and I said maybe quantity surveyors wouldn't be known for their innovation. But actually, when you get into it a bit, you find that that's not really what you're being scored low on. Professionalism, for example, some responded that QSs were probably the most professional of the professions they used, which was a good thing for us. The QS team and the QS function, they said that while the overall service some queried the role of the QS now vis-a-vis the employer's representative, and there was a bit of a grey area there. They felt still, but with the appointment, that there was a bit of uncertainty as to the QS's role relative to the role of the ER. And they found in certain instances that QSs were stepping back from their role because of that, because somebody else might be appointed as an ER. Resourcing, a strong view came back that the relationships between professionals now and the clients was akin to contractors and clients, and that the old, I suppose, collaborative relationship between professionals and their clients was diminishing. And they felt that there was no real give and take anymore between the clients and the professional team. There was a view as well, which is interesting, that practices nowadays primarily comprised of senior managers and junior surveyors, and that the middle management had departed, which is probably true given the downturn. A lot of middle management were probably let go and have gone further afield, and a lot of practices now, smaller practices in particular, have their senior partners and their junior surveyors and no layer of management in the middle. That bodes well, I suppose, for surveyors that are graduating at the moment and are coming out into industry. Experience of staff, again, similar to that, re-echoed that the restructuring of practices in the economic downturn meant that there was a lack of middle management. The knowledge of the capital works framework, again, mixed messages there, and felt that a lot of QSs probably weren't as knowledgeable of that as they should be. And again, down to staffing availability, felt really that at times there was a lack of I suppose, senior surveyors to replace surveyors that might be appointed to a job. There might be one particular senior surveyor appointed to a job. If that surveyor wasn't available, there was nobody to stand in their place. Communication merits, which is an interesting thing, and again, I suppose, with fee bidding, it meant that design teams now were really being picked on the most competitive bids, and obviously with that, there could be a geographical spread, rather than trying to, which was the old way, picking off panels, maybe picking a design team that were local to the project. You could have a project, for example, in Kerry and have some of the design team members now from Donegal. And they felt that that affected communication, and a lot of the communication now is being done through email rather than conversation, meetings, telephone conversation, as the way it used to be in the past. Response times, again, wasn't good. Geography was mentioned as a possible contribution to this. And innovation, whereas I felt the low score on innovation was down primarily to the fact maybe that surveyors weren't innovative, the feedback we actually got from clients was that the PwC framework was too prescriptive and that it didn't allow sufficient innovation or didn't allow scope for innovation. Ethical approach, thankfully we marked very high on that, on ethics. Satisfaction with cost planning, again, the scoring here was reasonably high, scored in the 7s in accuracy and timing. 8.5 in exclusions and comprehension. Life cycle costing scored low. I suppose on that, the accuracy they felt varied from job to job, and again, one of the feelings there was that local practices tended to have the finger on the pulse a bit more on local jobs, whereas the national practices maybe that were appointing people from perhaps Dublin to regional jobs didn't have their finger on the pulse as much as they would have liked. Timing, again, they said tended to be a problem with small practices, but they were prepared to trade this against greater accuracy because a lot of them felt that the smaller local practices had a greater level of accuracy and had their finger on the pulse a bit more. Life cycle costing, they felt that there was huge opportunities here for QSs and that it's not being exploited enough. So again, for any quantity surveying students here or any other architectural or engineering students, life cycle costing is something the clients are very interested on, and it feeds in as well to what we were talking about earlier on with BIM, and certainly with a greater knowledge of buildings and structures going forward. Procurement advice, the feedback we got on procurement advice is that QSs were not greatly used for procurement advice. Satisfaction with the procurement advice, again, scores here, scoring reasonably high, and the feedback there was that they felt that there wasn't a comprehensive knowledge and understanding of procurement regulations. Often there was a misunderstanding between single-stage and two-stage tender process. The effective advice on applications, the feedback was that prior to the public work contracts, that the QS was more willing to give advice on these issues, whereas now there was a general sense that QSs were giving the feedback, you know, if there's any issues, you need to retain a lawyer. it's not within our remit. And again, that's probably down to the fee structure. Assistance or assessment on the process. They felt that QSs could be more thorough in meeting and assessing contractors and be better prepared to thoroughly analyse the issues before making recommendation. Again, that could be just a simple issue of timing relative to fees, because fee structure is so tight. Perhaps there's an issue that people are not committing the time to certain areas. On the satisfaction with tender documents, the feeling that was the knowledge of the contracts, that on certain occasions QSs are not following the guidance documents, which is a very important document under the new public forms of contract. And also there was a sense that the services that QSs provided are not as clear now as they once were. Again, this is the overlap with the employer's representative. And also there was a question raised as to how much of a role the QS has on the instructions to tender. In terms of presentations of documents, this was a particular area of dissatisfaction from clients. A lot of clients felt that junior staff were being used to prepare tender documents and that there wasn't any proper checking done. Previously, they mentioned that under the GDLA form of contract, for example, a number of clients would have had a 2-day workshop on the bills of quantities to ensure accuracy and to ensure proper collaboration between the design team. But they now felt that as the bills of quantities had dropped off the hierarchy, that this has been lost and there isn't the same level of attention to bills of quantities, and that there are a lot of discrepancies in bills of quantities. And that's certainly something I think that's broad feedback at the moment. And basically what clients were really conscious of is that they didn't want to see discrepancies in documents. They didn't want to give opportunities to contractors to exploit those discrepancies and to exploit those gaps between documents. And they felt that that certainly was happening now to a greater extent. In terms of coordination, they felt that the client usually has to handle this and they were most dissatisfied with that, and that they really have to step into the process to make sure that there's proper coordination between design team members, and that they felt that the QS is normally last in the chain in terms of timing, so they're relying very much on the other consultants to have their work done, to bring it to proper levels of design before the QS could start doing their work. And as I say, there was very strong feedback that when the bill of quantities is finished, that the bill of quantities should be priced, and that should be used as the last accurate cost check for a project before it goes to tender, and that's not happening at the moment. In terms of satisfaction with the construction administration and post-contract administration, the sense there was that in terms of processing of claims, that the QS and indeed the design team were not being assertive enough, and that they weren't, as it were, unpacking the contractual responsibilities of the contractor in terms of where the claim lay and the validity for claims. There was a lack of clarity again as to who was responsible for this role. Was it the responsibility of the employer's representative? Was it the responsibility of the QS? And there was a view again that the QS is stepping back from their role as contract administrator with the new ER role. Administration, again, they felt that there was no consistent procedures on the client side as to how to handle this, and they saw this as a failing from the client side, and they felt that QSs should be more assertive in pointing out to the contracting authority if the contracting authority themselves were departing from the procedures. Again, they saw problems between the ER and the QS role in that QS wasn't ensuring strict adherence and pushing other members of the design team to adhere strictly to the procedures. Project cost reports, some cases they felt that the presentation of those cost reports were quite poor, and there was some very interesting feedback on that. They felt that some of the bigger practices had their own cost reporting format, which they welcomed. They suggested indeed that the Society of Chartered Surveyors Ireland should step in and produce a standardised cost report for the satisfaction of clients, which QS practices should follow. The Department of Education have their own format, but they felt really that might need to be developed a bit more for complex projects, which I found interesting because I worked a lot in education. I found some of their projects quite complex, but obviously they might be talking about different types of projects. And again, they felt that there was a geographical detachment and that the connection was being lost, in that local small practices, they felt again, were delivering better narrative and better reports than larger practices who tended to follow a kind of a pro forma template and really didn't fill in the blanks about what was actually happening on the project. And again, dispute resolution, they felt really that QSs weren't being used for this, and that we're moving more to specialist claims consultants or solicitors. In terms of the final account, on this they felt that in terms of timing, that QSs needed to be more proactive, and that negotiations of the final account still falls to the QS to do. In terms of fairness, they felt again that there was a difference between smaller practices and larger practices, feeling that smaller practices were prepared to make a balanced call on issues, whereas larger practices were more abstract and contractual and really dealt with matters on a black and white scenario. And they felt that that compromised the client in certain instances and maybe didn't give the client the best advice in terms of pending disputes. And the sense was that they favoured maybe smaller, more involved practices to kind of steer them through the issues and avoid contractual disputes. Again, an issue of timing, feeling that QSs do not give adequate time to properly interrogate contractors prior to appointment, or in terms of their final account, to astutely analyse the final account. And in terms of surprises, regrettably, they did feel that there were surprises in final accounts, which there shouldn't be, because the public work forms of contract are structured in such a way that it's almost a rolling final account. One of the things here that they felt that the design team weren't taking a strong enough hand in terms of claims, and that they felt what was happening was that the contractor puts in a vague claim. The QS responds by saying that they have 20 days to provide full and better particulars. On the 19th day, the contractor comes back with some additional particulars. They're not sufficient. The quantity surveyor goes back, or the design team goes back and say, you need more and better particulars, and then the 20 days cycle continues. And they said, some clients said that claim analysis can drift ad infinitum, and that's something that they were particularly dissatisfied with. In terms of the overall assessment of QS services, and again, this was something that everybody had a view on, and I think this is really the crux of where public sector clients are coming from at the moment. By way of value for money, they said, yes, they were getting greater value for money, albeit when they went on to explain it, it wasn't necessarily value for money. They were getting cheaper prices, but regrettably, they felt that it was at the expense of service. They said that they would actually pay more than they were paying at the moment for a better service. In the last 3 years, they felt that a claim-conscious QS was arising, where QSs were now going back to clients seeking to be paid additional fees for any change in their brief. They felt that they would prefer to pay higher fees and not have to compromise in services. General comments. They felt that enough people do not appreciate the role of the QS in the public sector, and that they felt for us that the Society of Chartered Surveyors Ireland needs to do more on that front. They said that QSs themselves need to improve their profile in the industry and create a better understanding by all members of the design team of their role and their value. And one particular client said on their last 2 projects they would be willing to pay double the fee, and that they couldn't understand how practices could provide the services required for the fees that were being quoted. And as a result, they were accepting lower fees, but they advised the caveat that this could not continue, in that as a client they could not accept a lower standard of service, albeit that they were paying a lower standard of fee. QS as an employer's representative. Largely QSs are not being appointed as employers' representatives, but where they are, basically the clients would use the quantity surveyor across a broad range of roles as quantity surveyor, as project manager, as employer's representative. They felt that they were good at contract and it just makes sense to do so. Employers' representatives primarily on roads jobs were primarily engineers, but a lot of engineers were sub-consulting, if you like, QSs to assist them with the contract admin and measurement role as part of those projects. And some clients felt that the ER role was a broader perspective, whereas the QS was too focused on cost. However, they did see a role for the QS in terms of monitoring of construction program, and that they felt that the quantity surveyor scrutiny of contractors' cash flow and projections would highlight problems ahead of the other design team members becoming aware of it, in the sense that they felt that contractors could see peaks and troughs coming in the cash flow and quite a lot of quantity surveyors use the traditional S-curve format to assess that. Handover process, they felt that QSs were heavily involved in the status of snag and maintenance periods, as money was intrinsically linked with this, but that QSs had little role in terms of the actual handover of the building. By way of project management services, there was a more mixed response. A lot of people didn't use the quantity surveyor as a project manager, but those that did said that the QS made a better project manager than either the architect or the engineer, as they were cash conscious, and that was something that the clients in particular looked for. So there's probably a message there as well for both engineers and architects who operate in that role, that certainly clients are looking for cash conscious project managers or employers representatives in that role. And they felt as well that there may be greater promotion of the project management role under the upcoming review. So consultant procurement, and basically public sector clients here were asked in terms of how they appoint consultants, through frameworks, through open tender, through restricted tender, and through other means. And you can see there from that certainly there are a lot of frameworks still in operation at the moment. The feedback we were getting generally from clients is that they didn't feel that the current process provided quality and value for money, and they might get the cheapest price, but they're not getting the quality. Some of them said that to operate on a fee bidding basis, you would almost need to rank quality as 90% of the marks, with price being 10% of the marks. And they felt that the system at the moment did not deliver the most appropriate consultants in terms of quality and value for money. Being brought down to the lowest common denominator, they felt that this was a simple matter of mathematics, and that they couldn't really view professionals as contractors, and that's what was happening at the moment. As contractors were bidding competitively for jobs, so are consultants bidding competitively for jobs, and they wanted to see a move away from that. One particular comment was that if we pay peanuts, we can expect to get good service. One particular client had moved away already from the 70-30 marking and had moved to an 80-20 marking in favour of quality. And an interesting point that was coming back is that some contracting authorities were suggesting that there was an argument now being made for going back to percentage fee for early stages, and that when the scope was nailed down and when a cost plan was put in place, that they might then move to a fixed fee basis. So they were actually looking at almost at a two-stage process. That in the first stage, which they see as the key services, the key professional services to them, that they would appoint those on the basis of merit, on the basis of experience, on the basis of qualification, and not just on the basis of price. Once that was locked down, then they'd move away to a fixed fee basis. In practice, I'm not quite sure how that would work, but certainly it's something that's coming through from the client side, and it may be part of the current review. Again, there was a view that particular issue itself should be pushed by the design teams, by the professional bodies, in terms of talking to the various government departments and to suggest that sort of a move. It's interesting, I suppose, to hear that coming back from the clients now, given that the professional bodies at the time of this happening certainly advised against that and advised that what is happening now would actually happen, that standards would drop, that contracting authorities might get cheaper prices, but it would cost. And it's interesting to hear now that actually the clients are pushing back on that, and that they do want a better standard of service. So in terms of the overall, the strengths that the clients have been asking us to maintain are ethical approach and professionalism, scoring highly on that. Consistency of the team, and that they do want to see a more consistent approach from design teams, that if somebody is appointed to the job, that they remain on the job and that they're there available to clients, that they're not swapped in and out, and that if for some reason somebody who is appointed to a project has to either go on leave or is off due to sickness to somebody, that there's somebody of a similar calibre in their place. Again, consistency in terms of standard. Communication methods, felt really that there's improvements required in that, felt that there should be more meetings, more collaborative meetings amongst design teams, and felt that there should be a move away from emails. that covers the collaborative approach as well. Again, greater visibility of senior staff. That's something that they like at the moment because they felt that middle management has stepped out of organisations, but they would like to see not just greater visibility of senior staff, but greater constant involvement of senior staff. Obviously, that will be difficult for practices to juggle in practice. They felt that certainly design teams at the moment are working for the client's interests. They felt that there was a good level of scrutiny of contractors' cash flow projections amongst quantity surveyors, and they would like to see a continuation of that. Greater involvement in terms of processing of claims, and they felt that there was a local practice advantage, and that's something that came back a lot across the design teams, which is an interesting one really, I suppose, for Dublin-based, city-based consultants who perhaps don't have a broader spread around the country. So opportunities for improvement. Certainly the big thing that came out is fees versus value for money versus quality. You know, a big pushback on that at the moment from all clients, and that they feel that that's really to the detriment of the current system. Cost plans, greater emphasis on cost plans. Again, referring back to the point I made earlier on, a number of clients are asking that the bill of quantities be prepared on a proper basis as it once was, and that be used as the final cost plan check before the job goes out to tender. Project cost report certainly there's grounds for improvement there. The pricing documents and the bill of quantities, as I mentioned. Knowledge of the public works framework and the procurement procedures, and again, I suppose particularly from the Society of Chartered Surveyors point of view, greater promotion of the role of quantity surveyors. So that is it. I hope you found that of interest. I hope it will be a benefit to you, to a lot of you, when you do eventually come out into the sector and out into the construction industry. And as I say, while the survey was primarily that of quantity surveyors, I think you can see from the results that it is broader than just quantity surveyors, and it does reflect, I suppose, a lot on the broader role and services of the design team. Thank you very much.